Okay, I'm going to go ahead and run down the patch 4.4 notes just so you guys can get my take on it. All right, so Kassadin basically, I think the biggest change with Kassadin honestly would be the W, obviously. The W and the Q together basically change his playstyle almost completely. Before, he was used kind of as an AoE assassin in team fights, sort of. You saw like Fnatic and Gambit running Kassadin and just basically use his ulti into the team fight and E everybody, and just kind of get a whole bunch of damage off of it on everybody, so that like the whole team was crippled and slowed, and then basically Kassadin could just either Zhonya's flash out, um, and then go back in, 6 seconds later and do the same thing with the other ability, and by that time everybody was low because the other people on your team are also killing everybody. So um, basically that was something they wanted to avoid with this, I think. With the Riftwalk kind of nerfs, sort of. In terms of it ramps up a lot faster. They're not going to be able to. People aren't going to be able to Riftwalk in and out of fights as often. So it's going to be more focused on the Q and the W, I think, is kind of what they're going for. And basically, by changing it so that his Q actually is his way of deflecting magic damage, what they're doing is they're saying this is like your outplay potential, right? It's kind of like Victor Q in a way, where it's kind of like saying you have to use this ability smartly in order to block the damage that's coming into you from your opponent mage, instead of saying you get free damage reduction, have fun, you're OP. So yeah, that's basically the gist of the Kassadin changes, except for the fact that his W also is part of his burst now, so you have to actually choose a champion that you want to focus down rather than just AoEing the whole team. And that's, I think, why they took off damage on the Riftwalk as well, or I'm sorry, the Force Pulse as well, is because 60 damage off of the whole team, but you get an extra, 140 and then plus zero point 0.6 ability power, and then also, of course, counting these nerfs in as well for the Q. It almost makes up for it, but it makes up for it in an odd way where he gets more single target damage but less AoE damage. Okay, so moving on to the basic kind of just general balance changes. Annie has a lot of cool things happening with her, I think. It's going to be very interesting, I think, to see her in the bottom lane now. It's kind of hard to take her utility as a support away in terms of her just raw damage potential and her ulti being an AoE stun, an instant stun at that, where the likes of Sona, Zyra, Nami, you can kind of see it coming, and it has a delay, and it is generally those abilities are more threatening and more impactful, but they're not instant, and so it's a lot more difficult to kind of have an immediate engage with that. Even Leona, for that matter, doesn't have such a dramatic and instant engage as Annie. So that's gonna be hard to take away, but I think what they did was correct in that that shouldn't be taken away. Um, and simply look at this, 25 plus 30. That's like I think under 100 damage. Oh, sorry. That's under 100 damage taken away from Annie, and it's really not enough to take her out of the support role. But I think that it's the correct thing to do, because really what they did was they kind of made this change that they should have made a long time ago, which was to make her more viable in the mid lane, just give her straight up AP ratios, because it's more incentive to build AP, which is exactly what a mage should have. So yeah, I think that's a step in the right direction, and the whole Q utility also helps with if you go with the Relic Shield, which is what a certain amount of people have been doing lately, and starting Q, you can push the lane decently, or you can harass your opponent, so it's very versatile now, and you can get half the cooldown off, so you can actually proc your Torgons pretty well and harass the opponent. So I actually like that quite a bit. Okay, Diana. I actually thought Diana was pretty good to begin with. She's definitely not top tier or anything, but I think that as a mid laner, top laner, jungler, I think she's pretty solid. She really, it's not a huge thing that her ability power ratio got buffed on her passive, but it's definitely not negligible. It's something to be considered in the jungle, especially because before, what really set her back was the fact that she has absolutely no pre-6 ganking potential. Like, you can walk up and eat them, but that, I mean, honestly, that's just, it's going to be extremely difficult to go up there without, first blowing a spell or, I think what this does really is if you have AP in your runes, masteries, and potentially even early build, this could help her out immensely in the early game in terms of getting to 6 and being impactful in the lanes. Okay, so Elise, I think that this is a very needed change. Basically, just base damages on Q, and that's pretty much where her ridiculous burst comes from. I wouldn't have actually minded if they buffed her AP ratios a little bit, kind of like Annie, in the sense that her the whole tank build thing, like as we've seen in the past, like with Voyboy with his tank Katarina kind of thing, right? That's like always been a problem with these high base damage champions is that they can get really abusable if you just build them tanky and rely on their base damages. We saw that even with I think Froggens and Nivea back in the day. We saw him, just rush a tier into Warmogs and just be able to burst everybody down because he was so far ahead. Well, I guess that is contributed to him being a god as well, but you get my point. But what I do like about this actually is to kind of compensate for her early game um, drawbacks that they're giving her. The early game nerfs that they're giving her, they're actually giving her more late game utility, which I think is very needed. And it's not like you're going to max E first, which is actually I think a very needed change because they're actually nerfing her early game with utility as well as buffing her late game utility. So I think it's a perfect mix, and it gives a lot of counterplay opportunities, especially with only a 1 second stun at early levels. It's really not enough to be impactful in the early game, or rather as impactful in the early game as she was, but it's giving her more late game potential, which is really making up for it because it's kind of like saying, yeah, you have weaker early game, but if you don't necessarily get going as fast, then you can still, farm up, you know, lane tax, whatever you need to do to get back in the game, and you will be useful late game because honestly, a 2 second stun is very, very good for pick comps, for tower sieges, to pick somebody off under a tower, that kind of thing. And of course, the 4 seconds on repel isn't a bad thing either. All right, on to Ezreal. It's really not a huge change. Actually, I'll include Fizz in this as well. Just these two, it's really not a huge deal that these were buffed. I Ezreal might see a little bit more play because of the AP given to you from Trinity Force, but I highly doubt it. I think that with Caitlyn and Lucian just being so strong and not being touched this patch, I think that those two will always be a higher priority until something drastic happens with the AD carry position, or Assassins come back or something like that. Just because Ezreal is so much better of a duelist in that situation. And then Fizz, of course, I think that got hit probably the hardest with the Lich Bane nerfs, and I don't think that the 0.1 ability power ratio on W is enough. However, that's hard to say without being a Fizz main or anything like that, so I can't really comment too much on Fizz, although I just don't think that's enough. Heimerdinger, okay, I really do enjoy the fact that they gave his Q a little bit more of an interesting mechanic with the sort of Skarner-esque basic attacks now restore the beam charge, which is basically like cooldown reduction on the beam sort of thing. I think that's very interesting and very unique, and I think that it adds some interesting kind of just things to know about Heimerdinger rather than just saying, oh, those things shoot lasers. You have to be aware of the more that they attack, the more that their beam will come out. I think that's very interesting. I don't think that he'll be seen competitive, although I think he will be, Teemo level annoying in solo queue now, though. That's definitely true. Okay, and Kog'Maw, I think it's a huge buff, honestly, to Kog'Maw. I think that Kog'Maw is a huge threat now. It's very cool that they actually made his kit synergistic, and that his Q is, up to snuff now. It's it's honestly a huge buff to AD Kog'Maw, and is just ridiculously good now because honestly, 20% armor magic resist shred at level 1, that's completely ridiculous, and I see this being toned down probably at a later date, but it's hard to say. because Kog'Maw wasn't used already. So I don't know. I'm not sure. Um, W change, that's freaking awesome. I love that they're doing that to auto attack enhancing spells now, such as Tristana's W as well. Um, I think that it's a great little change to like I think they even set it up here. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, maybe they don't talk about it, but yeah, I think I read somewhere about it how they were saying basically what did it say with Tristana? Here we go. Using rapid fire or the Bioarcane Barrage up there is basically it's about timing your opportunity, not mana costs, and it's the same kind of thing with Kog'Maw. Okay, so Nautilus, I really don't think this was necessary, although at the same time, it makes sense, I guess. I think that the W early game, the lower cooldown makes sense, but I don't think that the bonus health ratio increase was enough, or I'm sorry, was important to do. I don't think that he needed that buff. I think that in solo queue he might actually be pretty dumb now, pretty good. Um, Honestly, the shield was not a problem. The amount of the shield wasn't a problem necessarily. It was in the fact that when it was gone, he has no damage, but I think that the problem with that is not the fact that he doesn't have enough of a shield. I think that it's that he doesn't have any damage after his shield is gone. I think that they should buff his other abilities in terms of damage and maybe even reduce that one slightly because that one is ridiculous. As well as comboing with his slow and his W, or I'm sorry, E, and the stun, you can just get a ridiculous number of auto attacks off, and I think that this was in the wrong direction. This change, rather. I think this one's fine. I think that's good for the early game to get actually a decent clear off after you've been set behind by an invade or something of the sort. Um, an interesting note on Sivir is that she is not a great laner right now already, considering how easy it is to just stand behind a minion wave. Although I think that they still hit her in the right spot. Um, it's kind of the Ashe treatment in a way, saying, we don't want you to be good in the laning phase, but we can give you all the team fight utility in the world because of your ultimate. Um, Honestly, Sivir and Ashe aren't bad laners necessarily. They're obviously not up to par with Lucian, Caitlyn, uh, etc. But I think that this does make sense. I think that it does make her a higher skill based champion, or I'm sorry, higher skill cap champion, and that you have to time her spells a lot better. Her E is a lot less punishing, but it does make up for the fact, or I'm sorry, it does make it a little bit more important to use properly because it gives you so much mana back, because you'll be using your Ricochet so much in lane potentially. Um, With Skarner, I think that honestly this is a step in the right direction. I think that if his E is good enough, Skarner will be a viable champion. Although I would like to see something along the lines of his auto attacks increasing the duration of the slow, or his Q increasing the duration of the slow, something of the sort to make it interesting. But I guess we're not seeing that here. Although again, I do think this is a worthy change, and I think that it is where he needs the help is in his E. I do agree with that. Thresh, I think this is kind of interesting. Um, it kind of sucks for lower skill players, in lower elos because it takes away some of the ease of access to his souls. Like, oh, I forgot that one. Let me walk over here, grab it, that kind of thing. Um, Although I do think it's cool. It's kind of Zac-esque in the sense that the passive blobs or the souls. It's kind of saying, you really need to think about what you're going to go pick up instead of just here's a bunch of armor and AP for free. All right, Twisted Fate. I think that this is a worthy change. I think that it's about accurate to where Lich-Bane is at the moment after the nerfs. It's about a 0.25 ratio nerf on the Lich-Bane, but it also has a significant amount of AD behind it. So obviously Twisted Fate is going to be building AD probably, as well as Lich-Bane rather. Um, but I do think that it makes sense because his AD will probably make up for that 0.5 ratio, or 0.05 ratio rather, and I think that these also will help him, before he gets his Lich-Bane, and if you don't want to build Lich-Bane, that sort of thing. If you want to rush a Zhonya's, sorry, or, I don't know, Nashor's Tooth or something, it does make sense, I think, to do that to Twisted Fate, because he is one of the more versatile builders in in the list of supposed Lichbane necessary champions. All right, let's move on to Vi. I think this is interesting. I guess it makes sense. It's the same kind of thing as Annie, and and Elise sort of, um, in that they're raising her ratios as they reduce her base damages. It makes sense. They don't want her to build tanky. They want her to build the damage, and kind of have her more as a single you out kind of guy instead of also having the AoE CC in her ultimate. Um, the CC on the secondary targets has been reduced, so it's more of a you know, get to the squishy and kill him rather than a CC your whole team. Like I said, Fiora bug, Karthus bug. I don't think there are too many important updates here. Udyr's E has changed a little bit in terms of the tooltip. I guess that was a bug there. Okay, so Lichbane, as I said, it's a 0.25 ratio nerf from 0.75 to 0.5, but it also deals 75% of your AD as magic damage. So in the late game, it's going to be actually decent because obviously you don't get any AP for free, but you do get AD for free. So if you get Lichbane, you'll kind of, I don't want to say automatically scale, but it will scale slightly better than it did in that sense if you're behind. Trinkets, I think that this is good, just flattening out things real quick. Basically, at the beginning of the game, you won't be able to ward anything until 120 seconds rather than 90. That's basically 2 minutes into the game. That's after the camps spawn, which is very interesting for competitive play, and we're going to have to see how that works out. Hopefully it means more level 1s, but I really can't say how that's going to affect them. I do like the swap cooldown as well, being reduced, because it rewards you for switching and doesn't make it so that you have that 3-minute cooldown where you're just kind of doing nothing in terms of vision. In competitive games, people will be less hesitant to get the sweeper at certain points and be less hesitant to hopefully get the scrying orb, but that's up in the air still. Okay, the Wriggles line, as they're saying here, is basically what they're doing is they're changing it into an attack speed item rather than an armor item, which makes sense, I suppose, although I still don't quite understand who this is meant for. I suppose it could be meant for Udyr, but I just don't see where it belongs on any certain champions, so I can't really comment on it. I just don't understand. Teleport, I think this is a wonderful change. I think that this is probably the best change that they've made to competitive play in a while. So it's basically the fact that if you use it on an allied turret instead of a ward, minion, item, etc., that you will have the cooldown reduced by 100 seconds. It's wonderful. I just love it. And then here, the cancellation penalty also, that I'm not so thrilled about, but it makes sense. Canceling a teleport in progress reduces the cooldown of teleport from 200 to 150 seconds. Teams now have to be a lot more clear when communicating about teleport, and they have to make sure that their top laner or mid laner or whoever's using it has to have a clear place and time in mind and has to read the opponent correctly. Graphical updates, that's awesome. And then I'm not going to go over these Dominion and Twisted Tree line changes. I think that it's cool that they're giving love to these, but it's not really my area of interest. Thanks a lot for watching.